Thank you, Gail. Thank you, everyone. Apologies. Everyone's got plenty of bosses in life, and I have a number, and one of them in Parliament today had some issues, so I needed to help clarify. So let me just start by saying Warramie. It's Darug language. The EPA, obviously we have offices and people based around New South Wales, but our main office is in Parramatta, which is on the lands, the ancestral lands of the Darug and Barramadigal people. I want to extend my respect to their elders and also acknowledge we're meeting today on the land of the Gumbunya people and extend my respect to the elders from the Gumbunya who since deep time have cared for this country and whose ancestors walk alongside us today and whose elders have many lessons for us all to consider and integrate as we work on sustainably living on this continent. It's quite striking to think that Australia's First Peoples lived through 2 ice ages and incredible climatic variation over 70,000+ years and did so in a sustainable way. So one of the big priorities for the EPA, if you can go to the, I'm doing this, sorry, is not simply to acknowledge that, but to work hard to integrate the lessons and the ecological knowledge that is held by elders today across a variety of contexts into our work. And I know that I think one of my colleagues took you through the establishment of our Aboriginal People's Knowledge Group. We're working across the board in policy, in programs, in regulation to better integrate that wisdom and knowledge to help us solve these incredibly complex, interconnected challenges together. It's great to see that the government program in waste and sustainable materials does have $5 million allocated to working in partnership to improve directly the waste management, recycling, illegal dumping and littering occurring in remote Aboriginal communities. And the EPA is currently working with our existing Aboriginal communities waste management and land cleanup programs to refine those and evolve them and improve them with impacted communities. So I think anyone who has been around these issues for long enough and travelled around New South Wales or Australia would have seen the incredible disadvantage that what we now call discrete Aboriginal communities that were once Aboriginal missions face in terms of waste and contamination. Many houses were built by government there out of asbestos and then bulldozed and left, and then the land was handed over to the land councils, and historically it hasn't been a focus, and it needs to be. It's something the EPA continues to work on and with our colleagues across government and in those communities. So we've seen a lot of media on the great asbestos mulch crisis of 2024 in Sydney, but there's some really pressing asbestos issues that we need to address that are not top of mind because they're often out of sight. So I just wanted to start with that focus. It's a real focus for us this year. I hope that you'll see that permeating all of our work, and we won't always get it right, but we're taking those steps. So I've just covered that. So I wanted to, I'll get into circularity and climate and how the EPA is aiming to help enable all of the interconnected issues there to shift in a sustainable way. But before I do, I wanted to just give a little bit of background on the approach that we are seeking to build here at the EPA for programs, for policy and for regulation. And we call this stewardship. And really, in my mind, this is at the heart of what's required for effective responses to these challenges. And Anne, that was great data. I can't wait to have a go on that dashboard. But you can see how interconnected and complex just that one part of our challenge is as we think about a circular economy. And for the EPA, I think we can only work together with all of you on addressing these challenges if we take what I consider to be a stewardship approach, which is often regulators and other agencies get very stuck in the legal framework. Do I have an ability to fine you or do something else? Can I get a conviction? If so, I'm going to act, and that's how my thought process goes. Stewardship requires us to really step back and think about the ultimate outcome that we're trying to achieve, which is a sustainable, thriving, inclusive, circular, zero carbon economy. And we can only do that through real collaboration and through a posture of humility. That doesn't mean letting people get away with breaking the law or bad actions, but it means deep listening. And I don't know if any of you have interacted with government agencies before, but deep listening is sometimes not something we're very good at, and we are working to build that capability. It's something you can learn to do. But it also means, as we think about these challenges, we expand our own mindset, because many of our approaches are not adequately risk-based yet. I've alluded a little bit to that in the asbestos world, and some of our rules unnecessarily differ from other states. They're too complicated. We'll always want harmonisation, but we'll want to do that with you and in a way that delivers high-quality outcomes. There's no point harmonising to a bad outcome. That is even worse. And for the EPA, deep listening is something that's a real focus for us to build this year, so we can do that collaboration. And it will allow us, I hope, to better stand in your shoes and help you address the twin challenges of both reducing pollution down, but also enabling up and growing into life all of the new things we need to do if we're going to have a circular economy. And when we think about the circular economy, of course we hear a lot about recycling, we use that as a metric, but it's ultimately about sustainable, almost indefinite activity that can avoid pollution, reduce pollution, remediate pollution, and deal with pollution, both climate pollution and the climate crisis, but also chemicals, soil contamination, water pollution, and so on. Circularity is one of our critical means to those ends. And of course it needs comprehensive systemic change. It needs new infrastructure, new markets, new design and product standards. And that's kind of daunting, and it requires us all to change our thinking. Many of you have been on this journey for a long time, and your thinking's highly evolved. For most people in the community, they haven't begun to think about it yet. And New South Wales, as part of a national economy, is going to work very hard to help enable that systemic shift in a cost-effective way, in an efficient and commercially viable way, but in a very determined way that frankly requires us just to keep stepping forward and often learn by doing. And there really are these twin challenges in circular economy. We saw a little bit of this in asbestos in Sydney this year too. We need to manage contamination in our recycled products and do that effectively. But we also need to be bringing forward the new markets and the circularity that can sustain those investments. So reducing our waste, which has always been an EPA focus, and reducing pollution is now equally important with bringing to life these new industries, new activities and new markets. And I mentioned the climate crisis, and these issues are very interconnected, because circularity, to be effective, also needs to involve decarbonisation and regeneration. And government procurement, frankly, has a huge role to play here. Government is about a third of the economy. It's one of the biggest purchasers in many, many areas. The EPA is working to progress this first in the construction sector through what we call a Protection of the Environment policy, which is a great tool. It's been in our legislation for 35 years, has never been used, but we are consulting now on the first one, which will be for infrastructure, and it's going to require proponents to lay out how they both minimise the carbon intensity of their materials and project and maximise the use of recycled material. And that's binding on all consent authorities. So it will apply across a very significant range of projects. We're trialling it first on a road and a bridge, and looking forward to finalising that later this year. And I mentioned collaboration as we think about regulating to give regulatory effect and ultimately teeth to the government's very ambitious decarbonisation goals. Again, we're trying to take a very collaborative posture there. No two sectors are the same. Mining and agriculture are two particularly challenging sectors, and we're trying to work across the board to deeply understand those challenges and consider how regulation, broadly conceived, can help nudge those sectors along the pathway to decarbonisation, because a blunt stick and a big hammer is not the right tool. When we talk about regulation, we have about a dozen areas we focus on, including good practice, behaviour change, knowledge sharing, as well as enabling support, plenty of carrots, as well as obviously the sticks. And what I like to talk about is carrot-flavoured sticks, which I think some of these hard-to-abate sectors are going to need if we're going to hit those goals. The waste levy is obviously a key economic tool that government in New South Wales and now happily around Australia use to try and price in some of the externalities that we're all conscious of. And it's something that's going to be a key enabler to hitting these ambitious goals for circularity, because we've got obviously significant infrastructure needs, collection systems. We heard a little about FOGO, and many of you are aware of some of the difficulties contracting for those services when the industry isn't ready yet. We need to work with you on how the mandates come to life. There's transfer stations, all kinds of residual capacity issues. My colleague Asela Atapatu is going to talk in more detail about that work. We've been very pleased to do an unprecedented level of engagement for us with councils and industry to understand how effectively the levy is currently operating. And one of the key things that we've heard is the need to consider the levy as a key enabler for that future state. And I'm really looking forward to, through this year, working directly with you on consulting on the elements of what that looks like and building that together. The other thing we're building together, and we're working with regional organisations of council as well as industry to do this, is a waste infrastructure plan. And really it should be called a circular economy, recycling and waste infrastructure plan, because there'll always be waste. But a lot of this is also about the infrastructure to enable those streams to take them out of the red bin and out of the landfill and get them back in productive use. And New South Wales hasn't previously had a plan like this. The planning system hasn't adequately supported sort of eco-precincts, industrial ecology, and the social licence for all of those critical enablers. And so this plan, in a very transparent way, will align the data so everyone can see with confidence the data that will help you all make well-informed decisions. We'll do scenario analysis, publish a draft, and then ultimately update that through time so we can see spatially the material flow needs for that plan. And that's a really exciting project that's underway now. And I just want to touch briefly on product stewardship, another kind of stewardship, but in our minds, enhanced producer responsibility and product stewardship is another foundational element for building a circular economy. And we've seen some wonderful voluntary initiatives progress, as well as obviously some universal initiatives like Return and Earn, the container deposit scheme in New South Wales, which now I think all states are adopting. And in my mind, that's, again, a great opportunity to have highest common denominator alignment, where we can go to a single national label and reduce the cost of participating in that scheme and for consumers. But it's possible because individual jurisdictions have set a high level of ambition, and there's obviously great potential to expand those schemes and bring in more materials, more containers, and do that source separation, that very clean stream that has already enabled huge new investment in glass and plastic recycling in New South Wales, as I'm sure it will in Victoria and other parts of Australia. And of course, I need to tip my hat to South Australia, who was about 40 years ahead of us on that. So I'm not trying to say that we invented that by any stretch, but it's a wonderful example of what's possible. And I think when we look at some of the other challenges we see with the proliferation of poorly designed lithium-ion batteries causing a horrendous amount of fires across the waste and collection channels, and that risk continuing to escalate, we need to think really hard and fast about what a stewardship scheme might look like and what role it could play to help us bring forward the necessary solutions and channels and investment and pathways for those materials. We still have significant issues with tyres, even though the tyre stewardship scheme does capture, I think, about 60% of passenger vehicle tyres, which is great, but there's still a big issue there with dumping, disposal, and off-road tyres. Another issue that we are very focused on in terms of risk is solvents and flammable chemicals. And you can see from this data, we've been doing material flow analysis. When we look across the eastern seaboard, there's significant leakage out of visible channels, which either means illegal stockpiling is happening or dumping or some other sort of unlawful disposal activity. So that's work we're actually leading on behalf of all the Australian states. It's, I think, a particular issue in the eastern seaboard where a lot of this stuff moves across borders and is not tracked and appropriately dealt with to disposal. And it may be, again, an area that we need to focus on together for some sort of mandatory stewardship solution, if that is the most cost-effective solution. So just quickly, what's your role, what's our role? We're all in this together. Obviously for councils, waste and recycling is a major cost for local government, and councils bring it to life and deliver it. So we can't do this unless we're well aligned, and I heard the allusion to contamination in FOGO. Many councils have a hugely successful GO program with the garden organics. We want to make sure we're protecting those clean streams. We're not creating undue risk as we move to universal food and organics inclusion. So we really need to build on the best and keep working together as we implement these things to ensure that we make progress towards those very ambitious but absolutely essential goals. And if you think about the sort of funding that government has provided, it obviously will need refinement as we work through the issues around the waste levy and these learnings from the data and other sources and all of our collaboration. I think we also need to acknowledge that the kind of 10-year grant program probably isn't going to be entirely fit for purpose when we look at all these needs, and so we'll look forward to working through that together with you as well. So that's really it from me. I just want to say thank you for having me. Apologies I was slightly delayed, but very good to be here with you. Yes, and I've just been told to stay here, so I will do that.
He does as he's told sometimes. Well, we have a few more minutes, so we'll maybe ask the question for the floor, but I just was reflecting on Anne's presentation and yours, and Anne's showed us end of pipe ain't great on, and I would caveat, on current consumption and production. Mm-hmm. I think our big challenge, right, is to change what's produced and how it's consumed. Yes. How do you see us bringing that, because like you talked about circularity and aspirations as opposed to regulation, but our biggest challenge is how do we bring both ends of the supply chain together? How do you see us doing that? Like, because it's desperate, right?
In 1 minute?
Yeah, no, you can have two.
Well, this is, that's the right way to frame the problem. This is the most significant transformation of our economy that anyone in the workforce today has seen. You know, it's at least as big as the kind of wartime transformation that had to happen in Australia and you know, countries like the UK and the US in the early 1940s. So it's huge. So we can't, I mean, if you thought our earlier targets were hard, and maybe we could all sit around in our offices, you know, drawing up how to solve them.
Oh, you don't,
maybe.
With APCO, you can't do that. You got to do it.
Well, we can only do it if we really work on some of those softer skills like deep listening, so we actually understand better all of the context. And then, frankly, we just have to start. It's not going to be perfect. We're not always going to get it right. EPA won't always get it right. But Australia is, I love this country. In some ways, though, we are still a prisoner island where we want to see the perfect solution before we move. And that mindset has to change. So we, as a regulator and as an input into policy and these other programs, we need to help government take that posture and help all of you. And we can do that through trialling new technologies. We're looking at a pilot licensing regime so we can make it easier in New South Wales for businesses to innovate without going through the whole EPL process until they scale up. There's a lot of other regulatory reform that can help, but it starts with the right conversations. So I hope we're starting those.
How do we accelerate designing out? Our biggest challenge, and you and I were talking about this last night, biggest challenges, POPs, asbestos. We've now got, you know, again, we're talking about banning the false stone for households, but our sector's going to get it, right? And there's no thought around, A, stop putting it on market, and B, that stuff that's circulating. How do we get the paradigm that goes, if we place it on market, be it vapes or anything, even just banning it doesn't deal with what's in circulation? Like that is a, you know, we're still dealing with asbestos, and we can't, at our end, keep being the whipping boy or girl for people's poor design earlier. So how do we accelerate that conversation at national? Is it the national EPA? Should that be doing more? Not that we'd ever trust the feds, but like, how do we start getting stronger on this stuff? Because it's killing our industry.
I remember, was it 2012? When did the Commonwealth start working on the e-waste stewardship scheme?
Oh, NTCRS, it's like 2012, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, it's...
Steve, what was it?
You've
been around long enough. 2012.
Yeah,
right,
so...
that's SA over there, EPA?
The reality is, of course, a well-designed national solution would be great. And so New South Wales had the world's first carbon trading scheme. It was called GGAS. We repealed that when the federal government implemented their emissions trading scheme back in 2012. And when that was repealed in 2014, there was no price signal for climate pollution. And we've gone now a decade without any of those guardrails. So, of course, government has a role in setting the framework, and then industry can innovate. The legacy stuff you're talking about, Gail, is a challenge that we all just have to work through. We have to do it pragmatically. That, the level of risk, I think, needs to be better integrated into how our settings work. And that's often challenging. You know, we've seen these terrible diseases like mesothelioma from workers like Bernie Banton, from mines, from factories. And so the community have this visceral fear. I mean, we had politicians calling for a public health emergency to be declared and lockdown when we had contamination of asbestos in mulch. And that is not well grounded in the risk. This is bonded asbestos, it couldn't be aerosolised, and it did not present that kind of level of risk. Of course it shouldn't be there, of course. But it's not a public health emergency, and frankly, I think sometimes communicating that risk and doing that effectively and calmly as government is the hardest job. I certainly really found that very challenging for the last few months, and managing that. But I don't think we can put all our hopes in something new or some new Commonwealth agency. I'd love the federal EPA to be super effective, and I'll work hard to make sure it is. My understanding of it at the moment is it's basically doing the existing land use approval function, but a little bit more independently. I think we just need to all keep taking the steps we can take, and just keep in mind, we want national alignment, we want good progress, but we have to act.
Agree. I hate to do this to you, but Mike's got the talking stick, so I'm going to ask one question. Mike, have you still got it? Okay, and then I'll let you go.
Hi, Mike.
Thank you.
You're always on.
Speaking and agree with everything you said. Question of urgency. We have a 2030 target of 80% diversion from landfill and 50% reduction in organics for landfill by 2030. They cannot be achieved with the current policy settings, with the grant regime we have, with the regulatory regime we have, with the levy set where it is. I think everyone who knows what is government doing about either accelerating the reform, because we can't wait another 3 years. We can't wait another 3 years for the EPA to kind of consult, form a view, We're just running out of time. Do you think that the state government will just go, oh, well, tough, we didn't get to the 2030 targets, let's move on? Or do you think there will be a reappraisal of those targets and some acceleration and some real putting your shoulder to the wheel, and no one else can do it but the EPA can help the industry and councils get to these targets? It's on you, sorry.
I think it's the latter, Mike. I am a public servant, so some of these decisions are cabinet decisions, but I can tell you the government and our input into those processes is substantial, and we will be soon able to work directly with all of you on some of these key tools like the levy, the infrastructure plan. I think work is already well underway, but yes, it needs to go faster. I don't think there's an appetite to walk away from the targets.
I'm just going to challenge it going faster, because I know that we've got a habit of not getting this right, and the science is telling us in organics that rushing this out and just setting targets without the science in place is not necessarily the answer. We've actually learned from MWU, like arguably we should have started many years ago, but we did MWU and then we said the science had changed our view on that. We need clarity as to FOGO, muds and suds. But we've got currently really challenging issues with now, who would have thought it, asbestos and organics. We know it's out there. We used to get asbestos in MRFs. Rushing out a mandate for the sake of rushing out a mandate is not the answer. So there you go. You've got two views. Michael Gales, you choose. It's a difficult path.
I'm going to choose both because, of course, you're both right. And we should have started this...
I never want to be in a sentence with him.
Well, we can talk about it over morning tea, but it's, we
get these things right.
We do, and the contexts differ as well across different parts of the community. But that's why I think the tools are there if we use them in the right way. Things like this protection of the environment policy, and you all know this, like government procurement can be a major lever. We just haven't used it effectively to bring forward some of the pull factors for this innovation. And when we think about contamination, obviously our learning is growing all the time, but the New South Wales EPA is very concerned about the chemistry and the residual chemistry that remains after many compostable products break down. And we consider that to be an unacceptable level of contamination, which is why we don't allow compostable containers in the green bin. And some of my colleagues in other states have a different view. But when you think about persistent organic pollutants and fluorines and things like PFAS, a precautionary approach will help us much more in the long run. And so if it takes a bit longer to work through those issues, well, it may well. But in terms of the broader work and getting to the 80% and getting progress on FOGO, obviously there are things we can do more urgently and more quickly that won't create legacy issues. We just need to make sure we're not locking in tomorrow's asbestos by what we do today.
Or the 3 parts per billion Queensland standard for FOGO.
I won't comment on my Queensland
okay.
colleague.
All right. Thanks, Tony. That was great. Could you please thank Tony?